The signal from Hesta lasted 9 seconds. 9 seconds of broken audio, a child crying somewhere in the background, a woman's voice reading out coordinates that no one had asked for, and then nothing. Static. Silence. The kind of silence that does not feel empty. The kind that feels like something just swallowed the sound whole. At Earth Defense Command, the duty officer stared at the screen for 3 full seconds before hitting the alarm. He had been trained for a lot of scenarios. A colony of 47,000 people going dark in under 6 minutes was not one of them. Word moved fast. By the time General Harlan reached the operations floor, every screen in the building was lit up. He looked at the map. He looked at the last known position of the Corruvian fleet. He looked at the 9-second audio file one of his analysts had already isolated and cleaned up. He listened to it once. Then he told everyone in the room to sit down and get to work. No one panicked. That was the thing about Harlan. He did not give panic any air to breathe. 3 sectors away, on the outer repair dock above Station Mir, Rin was halfway through rewiring a thruster relay when his communicator buzzed with a priority recall code. He read it twice. Then he put down his tools, sealed the relay panel, and told the dock foreman he was done for the day. The foreman started to argue. Rin was already walking. On the surface of a quiet posting near the coast of what used to be Portugal, Dara Wells was sitting outside watching the water when her orders came through. She did not read them twice. She had been half expecting them for weeks. Something had been building at the edges of known space, the kind of pressure that soldiers feel before anyone in a meeting room admits it out loud. She stood up, went inside, and started packing. At Voronine, the Galactic Council's main diplomatic station, Ambassador Solis was already in the chamber when the Corruvian delegate arrived. The delegate, a tall creature with flat black eyes and a voice like cracking wood, placed a formal data chip on the table. Solis did not pick it up. He already knew what was on it. Every species the Corruvians had ever absorbed started with that chip. Surrender terms, resource quotas, a list of what Earth would be allowed to keep. Counselor Yeth, who represented the Selvori and had seen more of these moments than he cared to count, leaned slightly toward Solis and said very quietly, "They expect you to read it. They expect a counteroffer. That is how it always begins." Solis nodded once. Then he slid the chip back across the table without opening it. The Corruvian delegate went still. Solis transmitted Earth's official response through the Council's open channel so that every species present could hear it clearly. 11 words. "We do not negotiate the return of what is already ours." The chamber was quiet for a long moment. The Corruvian delegate picked up the chip and left without another word. In the Corruvian command ship sitting at the edge of the Hesta system, Commander Vreth received the transmission and read it 3 times. Not because it confused him, because he wanted to be sure he had not missed something, some hidden meaning, some angle. No species had ever responded this way. Not one. In 40 years of expansion, the Corruvians had absorbed 19 worlds, and every single one of them had opened negotiations within the first hour. Vreth turned to his senior analyst and asked if the humans understood what they were refusing. The analyst confirmed that yes, the humans had been given full data on Corruvian military capacity. Standard procedure. Vreth was quiet for a moment, then he almost smiled. He had never had a species make it interesting before. He marked Earth on his command map. He gave the order to hold position at Hesta and prepare for the next phase. He was not worried. He was curious. That was his first mistake. Back on Earth, General Harlan stood in front of a room full of officers and spoke for exactly 4 minutes. He did not talk about honor. He did not talk about history. He talked about Hesta. He talked about 47,000 people who woke up that morning with no idea this was coming. He talked about what it meant to leave them there. Then he told his officers what he needed from each of them, in order by priority, starting now. Dara Wells boarded her transport before dawn. Rin arrived at the engineering bay on the same station 3 hours later, and immediately started pulling up schematics for every civilian drone unit in the outer grid. Elder Noah Bryn, who had been quietly advising Earth's command structure for 11 years, took her seat at the senior strategy table and said nothing for the first hour. She just read, absorbed everything, mapped the shape of what was coming. The Corruvians had done this 40 times across the galaxy. Fast strike, silence the colony, wait for the negotiators to arrive with their hands open. They had never done it to a species that did not send negotiators. Somewhere on a Corruvian ship, Vreth was already planning his next move. He had no way of knowing that 3 humans were already planning 4 moves ahead of him, and that none of them were planning to ask for anything back. They were planning to take it. The Corruvian intelligence file on humanity was 43 pages long. It covered population numbers, energy output, ship classifications, weapon ranges, and average soldier lifespan in combat. It had charts. It had projections. It had a full breakdown of Earth's known fleet positions and estimated response time in the event of an aggressive action. What it did not have was a single page about what humans did when someone they loved was taken from them. Vreth reviewed the file over a meal and found nothing that changed his thinking. Soft bodies, short lives, weapons that could not crack Corruvian hull plating at standard combat range. He had faced species with far more firepower and broken them in days. He set the file aside and moved on to logistics. On the lower deck of the same ship, Lyra was not eating. She was reading. She was not supposed to be reading human history files. Her clearance covered tactical data, not cultural archives, but she had pulled them anyway quietly after the 9-second signal from Hesta landed in the system log. Something had bothered her about that signal. The woman's voice on it had not been begging. She had been reading coordinates. Calm, deliberate, like she was making sure someone would find the right place later. Lyra opened one file, then another. She read about a war that lasted 4 years and consumed an entire generation. She read about a disease that killed hundreds of millions and the humans rebuilt anyway. She read about floods, famines, internal conflicts that should have torn the species apart, and each time, somehow, they had come back together and kept going. She filed a formal concern with her unit commander. She said the intelligence report was incomplete. She said the psychological profile of the species had not been properly assessed. Her commander told her to get back to her post. She went, but she kept the files open on a secondary screen. In the human engineering bay on Station Mir, Rin had not slept in 31 hours and was not planning to. He had pulled 12 civilian mining drones off the outer grid rotation and was currently converting their sensor arrays into something that could track Corruvian hull signatures at distance. The drones were not fast. They were not armed. But they were small, they were quiet, and there were hundreds of them sitting idle in maintenance holds across the outer colonies. Rin had an idea about what to do with quiet and small. His assistant asked him if what he was building was even legal under council engagement rules. Rin said he would find out after it worked. 3 stations over, Dara Wells was standing in front of 14 people who had all been pulled from various postings in the last 72 hours. Some of them were soldiers. Some were not. One had been a deep space surveyor for 6 years and knew the Hesta system's asteroid layout better than any pilot in the fleet. Dara did not give them a speech. She gave them a map. She pointed at the Corruvian fleet's last confirmed position. Then she pointed at their supply line. Long, thin, stretched across 2 sectors because Vreth had moved fast and had not expected to need a long supply chain. Fast conquest did not require one. She said, "We do not hit the fleet. We hit everything that feeds the fleet." One of the soldiers asked if Earth Command had approved the tactic. Dara said that Elder Noah Bryn had approved it 40 minutes ago, and that they were already behind schedule. Nobody asked another question. A transmission came in from the Selvori that evening. It was short, sent through a private channel, not the Council's open line. It said, "We attempted resistance when they came for us. We lasted 3 days. We do not understand how you are still in the planning phase. Most species collapse at the silence. What are you waiting for?" Dara read it to her team out loud. She paused at the last line. Then one of her people, a quiet woman named Seth who had spent 8 years on border patrol and said very little, looked up and said, "We are not waiting. We are measuring." The Selvori did not respond to that. But Counselor Yeth, who had seen the message through his own channels, saved it to a personal file. He had been watching humanity for years from a careful distance. He was beginning to understand why. The first strike came at hour 78. It was not a battle. It was a single, clean hit on a Koruvian resupply depot sitting at the edge of the Hesta system. No warning. No declaration. 3 of Rin's converted drones moved in, burned the fuel storage, took out the communication relay on the way out, and were gone before the depot's automated defense system finished its startup sequence. Vreth received the alert 12 minutes later. He stared at the damage report. A depot, not a fleet ship, not a command post. A supply depot, chosen specifically, hit with nothing larger than a mining drone. He did not understand the strategy yet. That was fine. He had time. What he did not know was that Dara's team was already mapping his next 3 resupply points, and that Rin had 40 more drones ready, and that every hour Vreth spent confused was an hour the humans were using. Vreth gave the order to advance the main fleet. He was moving exactly where they wanted him to go. Vreth made a decision that he believed was clever. He pulled footage from Hesta's internal security network, the colony's own cameras, and broadcast it through the Galactic Council's open data channel. Colonists in underground shelters, families pressed into small rooms, children sitting against walls with blank faces, a man holding a young boy close and staring at a ceiling like he was trying to find something to hold onto up there. Vreth had done this before with other species. Twice, broadcast footage of captured civilians had ended a conflict before the next engagement. The species saw their people. They sent the negotiators. It was efficient. He sat back and waited for the transmission requests to start coming in from Earth. Across the galaxy, on every station and ship and outpost with a council signal feed, humans watched the footage. They did not send transmission requests. What happened instead was harder to describe and far more dangerous. The noise stopped. Arguments on council diplomatic channels went quiet. Complaints about resource allocation, about slow supply deliveries, about personnel transfers, all of it just paused. Like someone had turned a dial. People who had been arguing with each other 20 minutes earlier were suddenly in the same room talking in low voices about the same thing. General Harlan watched the footage once. He did not watch it again. He walked out of the viewing room, stood in the hallway for about 10 seconds, and then went back to the operations floor and started giving orders in the same calm voice he always used. The only difference was that his people noticed he did not take a single break for the next 18 hours. Dara saw the footage on a small screen in a prep room while her team was running final checks on their gear. Nobody said anything dramatic. Nobody made a speech. Seth looked at the screen for a long moment, then turned back to her equipment and tightened a strap that was already tight. That was all. That was all it needed to be. Vreth was still waiting for the transmission requests when his communications officer told him that a human strike team had infiltrated the Koruvian forward base on the edge of the Hesta system. He assumed it was a raid. He scrambled a response unit and waited for the damage report. The damage report, when it arrived, confused him deeply. Nothing had been destroyed, nothing taken. No personnel were harmed. The base was intact, but every data terminal on the eastern wing had been accessed. Command codes, fleet schedules, deployment maps, munitions logs, the positioning data for every Koruvian ship in the sector. All of it had been copied, cleanly, quickly, Whoever had come in knew exactly where to go and exactly how long they had before the patrol rotation brought guards back around. And on the wall of the main corridor, written in Koruvian script with what his analyst confirmed was a standard human marking tool, were 3 words. "We were here." Vreth stared at the translated text for a long time. He had fought species that screamed, species that pleaded, species that threw everything they had at him in one desperate push and burned out fast. He had never fought a species that broke into his base, took everything useful, left everything else untouched, and wrote a note. Lyra heard about the base infiltration through the ship's internal communications and felt the unease she had been carrying for days grow heavier. She pulled up her concern report, the one her commander had dismissed, and added new notes to it. She wrote that the humans were not responding to standard psychological pressure. She wrote that they appeared to be operating on a longer timeline than any species the Koruvians had previously encountered. She wrote that the base infiltration suggested not desperation but patience, and that patience in a species defending its own people was something the intelligence file had not accounted for at all. She saved the report. She did not send it again. She already knew what would happen if she did. Instead, she opened a secondary channel, encrypted, slow, so it would not trip any of the ship's automated monitors. She had found a human frequency in the data files. She did not know if anyone was listening on the other end. She sent a short message anyway. In an engineering bay 3 sectors away, a screen lit up with an incoming signal from an unregistered source. Rin almost deleted it automatically. Then he read the first line. He sat very still for a moment. Then he flagged it and sent a copy to Dara and to Elder Noah Bryn with a single note attached. "We may have someone on the inside. Don't trust it yet. Don't ignore it either." At the Galactic Council, Counselor Yeth had been watching the human response to the broadcast footage with careful attention. He had expected outrage, public statements, threats, the kind of noise that species made when they were hurt and scared. What he saw instead reminded him of something very old, something from Selvori history that his people had mostly forgotten. He quietly moved his seat at the council table, not by much, just enough that he was no longer sitting beside the Koruvian block. Nobody mentioned it, but everyone noticed. Vreth gave the order for a full bombardment of Earth's nearest outer outpost. He wanted to hit something. He wanted a reaction he could read. He needed the humans to behave like every other species had behaved. His fleet moved into position. It moved directly into the corridor that Dara's team had finished mapping the day before. Nobody named the Dallin corridor after anything heroic. It was just a stretch of dead space between 2 asteroid clusters, long and narrow, with nothing of value on either side. Old survey maps listed it as a shipping shortcut. Koruvian scouts had passed through it twice without incident. Their navigation systems flagged it as clear. Vreth's fleet used it because it cut 2 hours off their approach vector to Earth's outer outpost, and 2 hours mattered when you were trying to hit fast and hit hard. What the Koruvian scans did not flag were the 41 mining drones that Rin had repositioned inside the asteroid clusters over the previous 4 days. They were powered down to almost nothing, running on minimum cycle, cold enough that they barely showed up against the rock. Rin had spent 3 days calculating the exact level of power draw that would keep them functional but invisible. He had not slept much during those 3 days. He had also not stopped smiling, which his assistant found deeply unsettling. When the Koruvian fleet entered the corridor, Rin activated the drones from a relay station 2 sectors away. He did it in sequence. First group took out the fleet's long-range communication relays. Clean burns, precise, gone before the Koruvian point ships even registered what hit them. Second group moved to the navigation beacons the fleet had been using to hold formation. Without them in the narrow corridor, the fleet's tight structure started to drift. Third group did nothing dramatic. They just jammed every short-range signal in the corridor and went dark again. In under 6 minutes, Vreth's fleet was deaf, scattered into 3 separate clusters and completely unable to talk to itself. Vreth was not panicking. He was furious, which was different. He had contingency protocols for communication loss. He had rally points. He started issuing orders through backup systems. His fleet would regroup. It would take time, but it would happen. He did not know that Dara was already on Hesta. Lyra had kept her word. 4 minutes of shield grid access, exactly as she had promised in her encrypted message to Rin. She had told them the patrol schedules. She had told them where the colonists had been moved. She had told them which sector of the grid was weakest, and at what time the maintenance cycle created a gap. She had given them everything she had, and then she had sat at her post and waited to see if they would use it. They used all of it. Dara's team came in through the weak sector during the gap window. No explosions. No firefight at the entry point. They moved through the colony's lower tunnel network using the map that Lyra had pulled from base records and sent across in fragments over 2 days. The Koruvian ground troops were focused on the fleet situation, pulling reports, waiting for new orders that were not coming because the fleet could not talk. The timing had not been an accident. Seth led the first group to the shelter coordinates from the 9-second signal. The same coordinates the woman's voice had read out clearly and calmly while everything around her was falling apart. They found the shelter. They found the people inside it, 31,000 of them in total across 6 underground points, tired and frightened and very much alive. There was no time for anything except moving. Dara's team split across all 6 points and started guiding people to the evacuation corridors. No noise. No lights above minimum. Children were passed forward through the lines without being told why, just moved gently, quickly. An older man tried to stop and ask questions, and one of Dara's people just put a hand on his shoulder, said, "Keep walking, sir," and he walked. 31,000 people out before the Koruvian ground troops reorganized enough to run a headcount on the shelters. Vreth found out about the evacuation and the corridor ambush at the same time in the same report, delivered by an officer who looked like he had rather been somewhere else entirely. Vreth read the report twice. He was quiet for a long time. Then he did something none of his officers had ever seen him do before. He issued a formal challenge through the Galactic Council's open channel. Single engagement, full military commitment from both sides. Winner takes all terms, binding under council law. It was the kind of challenge that made a conflict official, public, and final. His officers assumed he was doing it from strength, from confidence, from the certainty that in a direct engagement, Koruvian firepower would settle what tactics had so far not. He was actually doing it because he had run out of ways to understand what was happening, and he needed to put the humans somewhere he recognized. A formal battle, rules he knew, ground he had stood on before. Ambassador Solis received the challenge at Voronine with every council species watching the open channel. There was a pause of about 4 seconds, long enough that Councillor Yeth quietly held his breath. Then Solis accepted. The chamber noise was immediate. Accepting formal terms meant Earth bore full legal responsibility for the outcome. It meant no withdrawal, no renegotiation. If humanity lost this engagement, the Council would not intervene. A junior council aide leaned toward Solis and whispered that he may have just committed Earth to an unwinnable position. Solis said, "Good, now everyone is watching." In his command ship, Vreth received the acceptance and felt something he had not expected. He felt relieved. He told himself it was because the matter would finally be settled cleanly. He did not look too closely at why the relief felt so much like hope, that he was still the one who was right. The observation ships arrived first. 14 of them from 11 different species, all holding position at a respectful distance from the engagement zone near Voronine. Every major galactic power had sent something. Some sent warships just in case. Most sent science and diplomatic vessels with very good cameras and very full recording drives. Counselor Yeth watched them arrive from the station's upper observation deck and thought that whatever happened next, the galaxy was going to remember it. The Corruvian fleet moved into position with the kind of precision that came from doing this exact thing many times before. Tight formation, layered defense, the heavy ships at the front and the support craft angled to cover the flanks. Clean, professional, overwhelming in raw number. Vreth had won engagements against fleets twice the size of what he was looking at on his scans. He had done it in less than a day. He was not nervous. He was methodical. The human fleet looked smaller on his screens than he had expected. That made him slightly more cautious, not less. He had learned over the last several weeks that when humans did something that looked smaller or simpler than expected, there was usually a reason. Elder Noah Bryn was at the back of the human formation in the command ship, which was not the largest vessel in the fleet and was not positioned where an enemy would expect a commander to be. She had a headset on and a cup of cold water at her elbow that she had not touched. She was not watching the visual screens. She was watching the data feeds. Numbers, positions, timing intervals. The shape of the battle before it became a battle. She had been doing this for a long time. She had learned that the first 2 minutes of any engagement told you almost everything you needed to know about how the next several hours would go. She intended to use those 2 minutes better than Vreth would. Rin's drone wing launched before the first Corruvian shot was fired. Not the mining drones this time. These were purpose-built, assembled over the previous week from components pulled from 6 different supply chains, designed around a formation pattern that Rin had found in an archive of pre-space age Earth naval records. A spiral approach, multiple small units moving in overlapping arcs, each one drawing defensive attention, while the next one moved through the gap the attention left behind. The Corruvian point ships fired on the first arc of drones, hit most of them, looked at their scans and registered the threat as minimal. The second arc was already through the outer defense line before they finished firing. The third arc cut the communication link between Vreth's left flank and his central command ship. Vreth adjusted. He was good at adjusting. He pulled his left flank back to close the gap, tightened the formation, redirected his support craft to cover the new angle. It was the right response to what he was seeing. It was exactly what Elder Noah Bryn had predicted he would do. The human fleet's main line moved the moment Vreth's formation tightened. Tightening meant the outer edges of his fleet were now closer together, which meant they were covering less ground, which meant the long left side corridor that had been a defended flank 30 seconds ago was now empty space. Dara's strike wing came through that corridor at full speed. She was not going for the heavy ships. She was going for the 3 midline vessels that were carrying Vreth's reserve munitions. Take those out and the fleet could still fight, but not for long and not at full weight. It was not a killing blow. It was a clock. She was setting a clock on how long the Corruvian fleet could keep fighting at full capacity, and she was setting it to run out before Vreth realized it had started. 2 of the 3 targets went down in the first pass. The third managed to begin an evasive turn before Dara's wing came back around. She noted it, adjusted angle, and took it on the second pass without slowing down. Vreth saw his munitions ships go dark and understood immediately what had been done. He gave the order to fall back and regroup at the secondary rally point, intending to reset his formation and re-engage from a stronger position. The exit vector to the secondary rally point had 3 routes. Dara's wing was already covering 2 of them. The third led through a debris field that Rin had flagged as navigable but tight. Tight enough that the Corruvian heavy ships would have to reduce speed significantly to pass through it safely. Reduced speed meant reduced maneuverability. Reduced maneuverability in a debris field against a smaller and faster enemy wing was not a fight. It was a problem without a good answer. Vreth saw all 3 options and understood that he had none. Lyra, now aboard a human support ship after crossing over during the Hesta evacuation window, watched the battle feed on a small screen and translated Vreth's final broadcast as it came in. Her voice was steady. She did not editorialize. She just translated the words as he said them to his fleet. Fall back, we did not know what they were. The Corruvian formation broke in stages. The outer ships first, then the support craft, then the heavy line began turning, not routing in panic, retreating in the controlled way that a disciplined military force retreated when it accepted that continuing served no purpose. It was, in its own way, almost respectful. The battle had lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Every observation ship in the system transmitted data back to their home worlds at the same time. 14 different signals, 11 different languages, but the core content was the same in all of them. The humans had won, not by having more ships, not by having better weapons, by being patient and precise, and 3 steps ahead of an enemy that had never needed to think that far before. Counselor Yeth stood at the observation deck window for a long time after the Corruvian fleet began its withdrawal. He thought about the concern report Lyra had filed weeks ago that no one had listened to. He thought about the 9-second signal from Hesta and the woman reading coordinates. He thought about 11 words transmitted across an open channel that had started all of this. He thought that the Corruvians had made their mistake very early and had not known it until now. The mistake was not attacking. The mistake was assuming that what they saw in that 43-page intelligence file was everything there was to see. The Galactic Council had not held a full session in 60 years. Every seat was filled. Species that had not shared a room in decades sent delegates. Some came because they had been summoned under formal council law. Some came because they had watched the battle feed from Voronine and needed to be in the room where whatever came next was decided. A few came because they had been waiting a very long time for this particular moment and did not want to miss it. Ambassador Solis walked in last, which was not protocol. Nobody mentioned it. He took his seat, set down one small data pad and waited. Vreth was brought in under council custody. He walked without being dragged. He stood where he was directed to stand. He had the look of someone who had spent the journey here going over everything in his mind and had not yet found the error in his thinking, only the error in his result. The council's senior moderator read out the formal charges: unprovoked military action, civilian displacement, violation of the protected colony statutes that every species had agreed to 80 years ago when the first expansion treaties were signed. The list was long. Vreth stood through all of it with the flat-eyed patience of a creature that had been certain of its position in the world for a very long time and was still adjusting to the news that the position had changed. When the moderator finished, Vreth looked at Solis. He said, "You were supposed to surrender. Every species surrenders." The chamber was quiet enough that everyone heard it clearly. Solis looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "We have a word for what you are describing. We call it Tuesday." Nobody laughed, but Counselor Yeth later noted in his personal record that the chamber's atmosphere changed in that moment in a way that was difficult to define but very easy to feel. Like something that had been held at a tilt for weeks had finally settled level. Vreth had nothing else to say. Counselor Yeth presented the resolution he had been drafting for the past 4 days. Corruvian military expansion frozen indefinitely. All previously conquered worlds to receive full reparations assessments. A formal review of every absorption treaty the Corruvians had signed over the past 40 years, with the option to revisit terms for any species that had negotiated under duress, which, the review board quickly noted, appeared to be all of them. The vote was not close. The Corruvian bloc did not vote against the resolution. They abstained, which in council law carried the same weight as consent when the opposing majority was large enough. Vreth watched the tally board and said nothing. He was not a creature built for this kind of defeat. He had lost battles before. He had never lost the thing underneath the battle. He was escorted out before the session closed. On Hesta, 3 days after the vote, Rin arrived with the first reconstruction crew. The colony was damaged in the way that places get damaged when they are occupied by people who do not care about them. Dents and breaks and things taken apart without being put back. But the structure was sound. The shelters had held. The tunnels Dara's team had used for the evacuation were already being repurposed as access corridors for the repair crews. A girl, maybe 8 years old, found Rin going through a wall panel in what used to be the colony's main gathering space. She watched him work for a while. Then she asked if the war was over. Rin said, "The fighting part is." She thought about that. Then she asked what the other part was. Rin said, "Putting things back, that part takes longer." She nodded like that was a reasonable answer and walked away. Dara Wells received no medal. There was a ceremony planned, and she submitted a written request to be excluded from it, citing an ongoing assignment. General Harlan approved the request without comment. He had served long enough to know that some people did the work because the work needed doing and found the ceremony part beside the point. Her reassignment request came in the same day. Outer monitoring grid, the far edge of explored space, past the last established colony, where the signals were sparse and the long silences between them meant nothing had gone wrong yet. Someone needed to be out there, watching, making sure the silence stayed the kind that was just quiet and not the kind that came before a 9-second signal. Harlan signed the approval. He added a single note to her file. It said, "First contact standing orders apply. Use your judgment." That was the highest level of trust Earth Defense Command could formally express in writing. At Voronine, Counselor Yeth wrote a long entry into his personal record about the preceding weeks. He wrote about 43 intelligence pages that missed everything important. He wrote about 11 words sent across an open channel. He wrote about a child's coordinates read out calmly in the dark, and a team that found the right place weeks later. He wrote about patience as a weapon that no scan could detect and no formation could account for. Then he wrote the note he intended to send to every newly contacted species entering Council space for the first time, a quiet advisory to be included in their orientation materials. It said, "Among the species you will meet, there is one that came from a world that tried to end them many times and failed. They are not the largest, they are not the loudest. They will likely offer you kindness before anything else. Accept it. And if you are ever considering a conflict with them, read their history first, not their weapons inventory, their history. Then make your decision." Far out on the edge of map space, Dara Wells sat in a small monitoring station with cold coffee and a long-range sensor feed showing nothing but stars. It was quiet. She was comfortable with quiet. She knew how to tell the difference between quiet that meant safe and quiet that meant something was coming. For now, it meant safe. She settled in her seat, watched the stars, and waited for whatever came next. She had been doing that her whole life. She was very good at it.